Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 157. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Canada, we have a very, very, very special guest, Jared Maynard. Jared, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I had to brave some polar bears and flying hockey pucks to be here, but I'm happy to be here.
Hey, I will say, all jokes aside, all of the Canadians I've ever interacted with, which at this point, it's got to be in the dozens between clients and friends and podcast guests. You guys are the most polite people I've ever met in my entire life. So the stereotype holds up to this point, and I'm impressed.
I appreciate it. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I mean, for anyone who, hears the stereotypes and wonders, are Canadians actually that polite? It's not a universal truth, much as our tourism or branding industry might like to have it seem, but by and large, Canadians are a pretty cool group.
Are you the kind of Canadian who says a lot?
Yes, and I know you. I don't know if the episode would have been released with Frank Benedetto, one of the founders of Honey Badger Project.
Yep.
So I'm a coach inside of Honey Badger, and I've heard it mostly through clients that I work with there. I'll say a subconsciously, and they'll point it out, and then I can't unhear it. It's great.
Well, we'll have a fun little game for anybody listening. You can count how many A's Jared lets out throughout the conversation.
Better
So,
not be a drinking game. I can't guarantee anyone's safety.
well, with that being said, Jared, I would love for you to introduce yourself to anyone listening who might not know who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Jared. I'm a physiotherapist in Ontario, Canada, a little west of Toronto. I'm a powerlifting coach. I'm a business owner, entrepreneur. I'm a business coach inside of the Honey Badger Project, like I mentioned. I'm a girl dad 3 times over, clinical athlete provider, educator. I'm going to start saying writer and speaker. Those are 2 things I want to get more into in the coming years. And then I also almost died last year because of a really rare autoimmune condition. And now I'm in the process of coming back and hopefully rebuilding even stronger.
That was so casual how you just slipped that in there at the end.
No, you know,
We will certainly talk a lot more about that. But before we get there, tell me, what's one thing you've learned from the world of physiotherapy that could be translated to just a general global life lesson?
I think what comes to mind first is the importance of getting really good at listening to people and developing your ability to talk to people too. Um, Another kind of parallel game to counting how many A's I say is on a weekly basis, how many times I bring up the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Great book. Judging by your reaction, you've heard of it or read it. So I read that a long time ago and I still have it on my shelf. But I bring it up because when I was in the clinic, and I'm no longer, but I spent, 6 years in the clinic. Uh, that book really helped to open my eyes to the need to be present with somebody, whether you're working with them as a physio in the clinic or working with somebody online, or just trying to be present in a conversation with your spouse or a friend or whomever. And then starting to learn more how to actively listen and hear what people are saying, but also kind of read between the lines and um, you know Chris Voss talks about tactical empathy, which I always love that phrase. And I think being able to bring up that empathy and um, then echo it back to people really helps them to know and feel like, okay, you're here, you're hearing me, you care enough to actually try. And you know, I continue to see, well, I mean, to put it plainly, it changed my marriage. It made me a better clinician, better coach, and yeah, I think that's probably top one, top three easily, if not the number one thing.
Great book, great point. If anyone listening wants to implement tactical empathy and you had 30 to 60 seconds to just give them a little bit of guidance or advice, what would that look like for someone who's never even heard that phrase before?
So empathy in general is being able to demonstrate that you understand how someone else might feel, even if you don't feel that way yourself. So tactical empathy is basically a way of describing, echoing, or communicating to someone that, man, that must be really frustrating, or that sounds like it must be hard. Phrases like that sounds like, that seems like, and using your tone of voice and body language to show that you're present and you can feel the person where they're coming from. Doing that helps to instill this kind of base layer of trust, of uh, caring, and then when it comes to trying to achieve a certain outcome, you could say to get what you want, but it's not about manipulating people, but just working together towards any sort of goal. If the person you're working alongside feels like you care enough and you understand them, everything else becomes easier. So tactical empathy is just getting really good at bringing up those moments to show that you hear where someone's coming from.
Mm. Now, I told you before we hit record that I love pulling up quotes and integrating them into the conversation. So I'll throw the first one out there. This is from Chris Voss from the book Never Split the Difference. He said, "He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation." Tell me, what does that mean to you? And do you find that you disagree with people often?
Hmm. Yes, and comparing where I am now to where past Jared was, I can voice that I disagree with someone more often, and also I can voice it more often because I've learned how to voice it in a way that doesn't seem confrontational. And I mean, I'm a natural born recovering people pleaser. So when it came to the idea of conflict or saying like, no, you're wrong, or I disagree, or whatever, that sent me running for the hills in past times. So for me now, whether it's in the people that I work with through my coaching business, trying to get stronger, we're deciding how to program or how to execute a certain lift. They have one idea, I have another. Cool. It's a lot easier for me to say, yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from. Here's where I'm at. I think this because of XYZ. I'm not sure that other idea is going to be in our best interest. What do you think? And again, not that Never Split the Difference is where all of my communication skills come from, but that book, along with a couple others, really played a big role in becoming more confident in putting that on the table, and understanding that disagreement, conflict, whatever, is not like the end of the world, but actually is an opportunity to work with people to figure out a solution. And
Mm.
not everyone's going to be down to do it, but the people who are probably pretty cool people.
Mm. That was so well said. I don't have anything to add there. So
Appreciate it.
yeah, of course. And so we'll get right into kind of the nitty gritty and a big part of your story. You alluded to this, but I'll ask a question and then I'll let you tell whatever story makes the most sense. So when you look back at your life so far, what is the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
Yeah. It's to date, it would be my fight back from the autoimmune condition called HLH that brought me down and pretty close to the brink last year. Um, so the summary or at least to start the story, is early in 2023. I started to get sick. I figured it was just a typical head cold. Didn't think too much of it because my wife and my daughters, they started getting sick too. Um, but a week later, they were all better and I was getting worse. So then that turned into fever and chills. It turned into insomnia, like the worst insomnia I'd ever had. My lymph nodes started to swell. I'd gone to a smaller hospital to get checked out and was diagnosed with mononucleosis. They gave me a medication for the insomnia, and like we figured that might just be what we do. But then about 4 or 5-ish days later, 4 or 5, I was still getting worse. And it was when my wife looked at me and she said, "You're yellow," as in my skin started to jaundice. That was when we knew that something was really wrong. So went to a larger hospital a little further from where we live, was admitted, and then within 6 days, was in the ICU with organ failure, had to go on life support, was on life support for 5 weeks. My kidneys were shutting down, liver was shutting down, my spleen was massive. Um, and yeah, we got down to essentially the last treatment option before it was just about making me comfortable. And it was a really rough time. Less so for me. I mean, obviously, I was experiencing it, but I was under heavy sedation. So at that point in the story, that was hardest for my wife and for my parents. And then my struggle kind of came after that.
Okay. So there's a baseline story summary that we have, and I would love to pick that apart and dive a little bit deeper. Let's just start with how old were you when you were diagnosed, and what did life look like from a physical health and well-being standpoint before that?
Yeah. So I was 32 and life looked, on the outside, I mean, even to me on the inside, looked pretty solid as far as health. The only thing that would kind of show up on my health record would be a genetic eye condition called choroideremia. Something you and I, wait, not the condition, but when it comes to eye conditions, we share that in common. Um, that was really the main thing. But aside from that, I mean, I was lifting pretty heavy and hard 4 times a week. I think I do a little bit of cardio here and there. Try to keep up with my daughters. Stress was relatively high because I was still scaling my coaching business. In 2021, I shifted from being part-time in the clinic and part-time online in my business to being full-time in my business and the Honey Badger project. So I was pretty pedal to the metal for a few years, honestly. So long hours, stress was high. But aside from that, there was no real indication that I or anyone else could really see that this was coming. And my doctors, even once we got into the fight with HLH, they said that it wasn't genetic. We did the testing for that. It was, in my hematologist's words, just a really unlucky hand.
So let's just define HLH before we keep moving forward. What does that stand for? And what is the physiology maybe behind that condition?
Yeah. So on your bingo cards, keep looking for those A's. But HLH stands for hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. Bit of a mouthful, but basically what it is or it's divided into two categories. The first one is primary, and that's a genetic or has a genetic predisposition. Usually it shows up for newborns and for infants. Um, and the other kind is secondary. In both kinds, the body will, or the body's immune system will attack healthy cells, particularly red blood cells. Um, and for the secondary kind, which I had, it's either caused by another infection, which was the case for me, or cancer or another autoimmune condition. So for me, it was a result of the mononucleosis, which was also a result of the Epstein-Barr virus, which apparently is a really sneaky kind of virus. You can pick it up, it can lie latent for a long time or dormant for a long time. And it's associated with other conditions and things like that. But that's what kicked it off for me. And yeah, it's a deadly thing. There really aren't a whole lot of stats for adults with HLH. It's more case studies, and even those are few and far between because it is so rare. But when it does hit, it goes fast, and it's the mortality rate's pretty high. Uh, from what I saw, stats wise, it was somewhere in the realm of like 57%. So a coin flip.
Wow. At what point along this path did you realize that there was an over 50% chance or a big chance that maybe you wouldn't make it through it?
Yeah, it was mostly after the fact, which is a really trippy thing for me because in the thick of it, like at the peak of of the battle, if you will, or where the stakes were the highest, I was so heavily sedated that I was barely conscious. Um, my brain, I guess, processed what was going on in the form of really weird dreams. Um, so, as an example, like I dreamed that I was kidnapped and taken away in the back of a truck to go to a circus. And I think that correlated to a time when I had to be restrained because the medications they use to sedate people, as the doctors explained to my parents and my wife, it affects people differently. So some people are really chilled out and docile, and that's all fine. Other people are really paranoid, and that was me. Um, so there were times, apparently I did this a few times, where I pulled out my tubes because I was so sick in the ICU that I couldn't eat, couldn't drink. They had to put in an NG tube, so tube through my nose down into my stomach to give me medicines and some nutrition, but I couldn't even have a lot of that. So I would pull those out, and they had to restrain me, um, and stuff like that. So it was, yeah. My parents and my wife had, unfortunately, the front row seats at the worst time of it, and to paint more of a picture, I went in to the ICU weighing about 130, sorry, 193 pounds. For, those who can't see or are listening just for audio only, I've got a full beard and that sort of thing. I had to have chemo, so all my hair fell out, beard, eyebrows, all that. Because I couldn't eat or receive much nutrition, I lost about 40 pounds. So when I woke up, I was about 150 pounds, and I'm about 6 feet tall. So really skeletal is how I looked. And yeah, they just kind of watched me wither away there to the point where it was the last treatment option um, that we really had on deck before it was just about palliative care. Excuse me. And I couldn't even get the full dose of all the treatments um, because of how sick I was with the organ failure and all that. But yeah, things turned around at a certain point to the point where I apparently earned the nickname Miracle Man from the doctors and nurses in the ICU.
So, at what point were things good enough where, you weren't sedated anymore or you were with it enough to recognize that you had made it through the hardest part of this battle?
That would have been early March of 2023 because I was out for most of February in the ICU. Excuse me. So late February, early March, let's say. And it was a slow process of coming off the sedation and starting to assess. The doctors and nurses were assessing where I was, and I was starting to get a bearing on what was all going on for me. It it honestly felt like waking up in someone else's body because for one, I looked so different in terms of the weight that I had lost, how thin my arms looked compared to how they were when I first walked into that hospital. My left arm, during the sedation period, I had a bunch of blood draws and IVs. They were drawing blood probably every 6 hours, yeah, at a certain point, and to the point where my right arm was just like blackened because of all the bruising. So at some point on my left arm, they had an IV, and either the equipment malfunctioned or someone made an error. But the medicine that was supposed to go into the vein stayed in the arm and then killed off the skin and the tissues there. So I woke up with a big patch of black, like leathery skin, eschar on there. So it felt like someone had taken my arm. Um, I couldn't move really in bed because I was so weak. Uh, I distinctly remember trying to hold my phone. I had an iPhone 11, um, trying to hold it above my head, and that would keep slipping because it was too heavy for me to hold on with my fingers. Uh, so that was, remembering as I say this out loud, I couldn't actually talk for a good chunk of time because I was intubated originally, and then they only leave the tube in like down your throat for a certain period of time because they're worried about um, I think it's atrophy or things like that. So they had to do a tracheotomy and like cut a hole in my windpipe, put the ventilator on there. So I had to learn how to speak with a valve with a tube in my neck first. And I couldn't communicate with my wife, couldn't communicate with my nurses. One of them very kindly wanted to put on music that I wanted to listen to. And I had to spell on her hand with my finger, you know, like letter by letter, that I wanted to listen to City and Color or John Mayer. So anyway, longer answer, but it was a gradual process where I started to understand what was happening. And it hit pretty hard. And then it came down to the decision of like, what do we do?
As I'm hearing you say all of this, one, I can't help but uh, imagine the pictures that I've seen on your social media, right? Those are the ones that pop up. And anybody listening can go and look because you put those out there, which I think is really vulnerable and also amazing because you know, I can't imagine it's easy to relive those moments, even if you weren't fully there from a conscious standpoint, right? To look back must be hard. However, that's what I'm picturing in my mind. And then two, you know, like through all of this, I'm hearing a lot of loss, that loss of function, loss of weight, loss of abilities, loss of freedom, and I can't help but make the connection that a lot of these episodes, the answer to this question involves some sort of loss. What's the hardest thing you've ever had to handle? And there's some loss involved with it. And with loss comes emotions. And those emotions are, you know, similar in some ways for certain people and different across the board. What were the emotions that you felt and experienced through this whole thing, both positive and negative?
Yeah, yeah, you nailed it. Loss, loss was the first one, and it was a persisting one for a long period of time. Um, it felt like someone had taken my body from me. They'd taken my work from me because I couldn't work. Thankfully, you know, I had a good friend and colleague, John Flagg, who I have known for many years through Clinical Athlete, the Honey Badger Project, all sorts of things. He stepped in uh, and took care of people or my clients, which was amazing. But I couldn't work. Someone had taken my arm, the rest of my body, my independence. Even certainty is not the word, but just what I thought life was going to look like, that was all suddenly gone. Then from that became a lot of anger. I was angry at God. Um, you know, I am religious. I do faith plays a big part in my life, and I was grateful to hear from at least one or two priests. You know what? It's okay to be angry at God because God can take it. Because I had a lot of anger. I was sad that I couldn't be there for my wife's birthday, or that I couldn't see my daughters. And as I gave myself time and space to experience all these things, then I mean, I think I had the resolution, or I knew that if there was any chance that I was getting out of that hospital and getting back home, I was damn well going to take it. So as these emotions all came and kind of stayed, uh, the resolution to work really hard with my own physical rehabilitation. Um, that was just a foregone conclusion because I was going to do everything in my power to get back home, to see my girls, to get back home to my wife. And yeah, those are the main players as far as emotions go for a good chunk, really the entirety of my hospital stay, and then also for a good chunk of the journey afterwards once I got home.
Mm. So I appreciate you sharing all of those, and I'd love to hone in on feeling anger, and in specific, feeling anger toward God. As another man of faith, that's always been a tough one for me, because if you believe God is good, it's almost hard to imagine that it's okay to feel anger in that direction, because all things should be working for the good of those who believe in God, right? That's kind of what we're told. That's what we believe. And how do you wrestle with that? How did you wrestle with that? How are you wrestling with that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I had the same challenge or trouble because yeah, God is all good, all loving, and yet we have generally the problem of evil and then also, the personal experiences of suffering. And I really clung to the story of Job in the Bible, and I really tried to aspire to be him. I mean, I was not at that level. I don't know if I still am, um, in terms of being able to weather the storm and suffer all these hardships and still, not curse God, but rather acknowledge his goodness and his providence and still make room for the sorrow and the grieving. So that was a big part for me. I think I was honest with God through the hospital and then also after the fact, um, where I had a lot of prayers where it was, Lord, I don't know what's going on here. I'm really angry. I don't want to be. Help me figure this out. And trying to come back to that place of trust of I don't have this understood. I don't understand why this happened in the first place or what have you, but I'm still trying and, you know, help me. There's still like the outstretched hand, like, I need you, Lord. So that was that was how it went for me. And I think I'm still working at it. There's been a lot of processing of the grief and the loss, and I'm more at peace with it now. I also worked with a counselor who he and I had worked together before this whole thing happened. Super, super helpful. He's also coming from a faith background, which was helpful for me, both in terms of, the psychological, more sciencey side, plus being able to incorporate belief and faith here. Um, so yeah, there's been a lot of processing. Uh, I'm more at peace with a lot of it. Still working on the faith piece, and trying to let go of some of the need for control, and trusting that God can use all things for good, even if it's really not clear how He might do that. Which it's hard when you're living it or when it's close. Um, yeah, don't have perfect answers, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And I don't think we'll ever have perfect answers while we're here. And I think that's part of what it means to have faith. We don't have the answers, but we trust. And it's a beautiful thing and it's a hard thing. I'm going to read a quote and then I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll kind of pose a question with this quote, but it's from Anita Morjani. And she said, I believe that the greatest truths of the universe don't lie outside in the study of the stars and the planets. Instead, they lie deep down within us, in the magnificence of our heart, our mind, and our soul. Until we understand what is within, we can't understand what is without. And I'm wondering for you, coming so close to death, something coming so close to that loss of this life, what are some of the things that you've since learned about yourself or perspectives that have shifted about life?
Yeah, I've it's certainly driven home more the beauty of of close relationships, people who care and show love in any circumstances, especially the scary, messy, dire ones. I mean, just thinking about the nurses, doctors, speech language pathologists, all the people who I was so blessed to be able to have help me and who, in a very real way, saved my life. Um, there were so many of them who took extra time and just were beautiful souls. One of my doctors in they had two levels of the ICU. ICU A was the most intensive, ICU B was a little less. I was in ICU B, starting to make my way out of there and improve. This is when a lot of the grief was starting to hit me. One of the doctors, she had 7 million things she could do that day, but she stood by my bedside. She held my hand as I cried. One of my nurses, she just came and just hung out with me in my room, in the room that I spent the most time during my convalescence. And we just talked about music. We talked about which boy bands were better between NSYNC or Backstreet Boys. That's still a hot button topic, depending who you ask. Um, there were so many examples like that I could keep going on with of people who showed me love directly when I was at my weakest, when I felt my most vulnerable. People who I'd never met who showed love to my family. They donated money. There were apparently prayers being offered in Ireland and India through this like ripple of like people who had asked somebody who asked somebody who asked somebody for prayers for this one guy that those three last people have never met. um, a colleague of mine from the Honey Badger Project came and filled up our freezer so that my wife and daughters had meals to eat and didn't have to worry about it. Uh, Someone that my wife knew from the States through like a group chat was up for a conference. He went to the grocery store and dropped like $300 worth of food and like dropped it off. So that hits me the most and that stays with me. Um, my hope is that it stays with me for forever. And I'm working at it so that I don't get too caught up in the hustle and bustle of day to day while still working towards meaningful goals. And like still keying into the fact that we don't know how much time we have. And everyone says it, but hot damn, it's true. And to the point where, I got it tattooed, memento mori, on my arm.
My favorite.
Same. It had a lot of meaning before, but even more so now. Um, yeah, the last thing I think is a reminder for me not to wait to just do the things that matter to me and my family, to make memories and not just put it off. Oh, we're busy this year. We'll do it maybe next year. Because again, we just never know how it's going to play.
I appreciate you sharing all of those, and they're great takeaways. And just to touch on memento mori, uh, it's such a powerful phrase. In English, I believe it translates to remember you must die, something along those lines. Am I right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Yep.
And so it sounds morbid, but I really think it's the opposite. I think the fact that life is precious and fragile and we don't know how much time we have makes it all the more beautiful while we are here. And to your point about trying to hold on to those positive emotions tied to how people cared for you and your family during this time, it's also just amazing, maybe not in a positive way, how quickly we can forget, how easily these things slip away. And you and I can sit here and anybody listening can nod their head in agreement that life is precious. Time is not promised and we should live to the fullest. And then tomorrow, you, me, and or somebody else listening will feel stressed about something that doesn't actually matter. And, and we'll forget these things momentarily. How do you bring yourself back over time to these positive feelings of gratitude and to remember what is truly important?
Yeah. It's a daily struggle. Sometimes it's an hourly struggle because of exactly what you said, where, especially or even for me, getting so close to dying, um, and having such a powerful story born out of really really awful circumstances, I can still get caught up about stuff that really doesn't matter. And Frank, my mentor who you had on, he told me that through his experience with family members going through similar things, it's remarkable how quickly we can forget. So my personal response, I haven't told him this, but here you go, Frank, is to not let that happen. So it's a daily reminder for me. The tattoo is one way that I, gave myself a reminder, but also it's tied to my prayer routine in the mornings and through the day. It's tied to how, or when I sit down to reflect at the end of the day or end of the week and plan for the next, to look at, each day and start off with a little prayer of thanksgiving because like this wasn't promised. Or when my practice, and I'm not perfect at it by any means, my practice is when my kids do something that I find irritating or something happens in my life that I really don't like, kids crying and I wish they would stop, or there's a mess in the room and like, man, I really wish this was clean. I try to come back to, hey, my kid's here. All three of my kids are here and they're healthy enough to play and make a mess. I'll live with this mess in the room. It's fine. Or, hey, my kid is here at home and crying. Crying's not great, but she's here and that's what matters. Or, I don't know, something that comes up at work. I could have died last year and I'm still alive here to actually experience this hardship. Okay, we'll make it through. So that's what I'm working at for getting better there.
Yeah. So with all of that being said, we talked a lot about this thing that was not within your control. If I were to ask you what's the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose and why did you do that thing? What's your response?
Sorry, I coughed. What's the hardest thing that I missed a word?
Done on purpose and why
Hmm.
did you do that thing?
Um, does parenting count?
Yeah, that counts. Let's talk about it.
That's definitely going to be in the conversation for me. And why is um, it's on the faith side, it's part of what my wife and I believe is part of God's calling for us to help us grow and to share His love for us with our own children. And it's definitely challenging. My oldest two are 6 because we started with twins. My youngest is almost 4, and they're amazing. They can push the buttons like no one else can. Um, but it's a very intentional process that my wife and I are trying to engage in how we respond to our children, how we look at our own upbringings, what went well and what could have been better, and recognizing we're not going to be perfect, but we're still going to do our best every day to meet our children where they need to be met individually, to raise them as best we can, to love each other as husband and wife and mom and dad as we do this. Um, I wouldn't trade any of it for the world, uh, even though it can run me pretty ragged, as I'm pretty positive most parents would say at one point or another. So that's one and probably top contender. But then also um, powerlifting, and I guess it ties into the rehab process after HLH. Again, it wasn't all within my control, but how I responded to it, that was a conscious decision. Um, and all the time spent under the barbell for the decades or almost 2 decades of my life at this point, um, gave me the muscle mass to survive the ICU and gave me the 40 pounds that I needed to actually lose, or 40 pounds to spare when I couldn't eat, and in a very real way saved my life like that. Then also gave me the skills and the determination, the resilience to get back after it as soon as I could, even though we were really starting from ground zero. Um, and yeah, uh, it's an application of the lessons learned under the bar that I never thought I'd have to apply, but I'm really glad that I had the ability to apply it.
So I'm going to make a couple quick comments about parenting as someone who is not yet, hopefully, a parent. And then I want to hear about the lessons from under the bar. So when my wife and I were engaged to be married back in 2019, I was still practicing as a clinician full time, and I would just ask patients, who were married, you have any advice or what's one thing you wish you knew before you were married? And there were some pretty good ones. I think my all-time favorite was this guy who had been married for I think 50 years. He didn't hesitate. He said, "You might not always like her, but you always have to love her." And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I could already feel that one. And so my point is, what I also heard was that marriage is hard. And I heard that about marriage. I heard that about entrepreneurship. I hear that about parenthood. Um, and I can't help but feel like there's a theme. And to me, the theme is the best things in life, the most meaningful and rewarding things in life are often the hardest. And I'm wondering if you would agree with parenting, and then we can talk about the barbell lessons.
Totally would agree. And yeah, whether it's parenting, whether it's marriage, um, take anything that really ends up being meaningful, defining as an identity, as a person. Anything, it sounds trite, but anything worth having really usually ends up being hard won and takes time. And that's certainly been my experience with meeting my wife, Ashley, and going through the dating and engagement process, and then realizing that we kind of sucked at certain things when it came to first being married, and having to figure that out together. I mentioned my counselor who helped me after the hospital. He helped me quite a bit before that with some things that I needed to process and learn how to be better about in my relationship with Ashley and how I communicated with her, how to read, kind of what read between the lines in terms of what she was saying, but also what I could figure out that she actually needed. That took a lot of time and effort, but was absolutely worth it. It's still something that I actively do and will do to the day I die. So yeah, worth it for marriage, parenting, absolutely about it.
There's this great video on social media that I've been referencing with some of my clients and even just people I talk with because it really hit me. And it was this video where this woman said, "Someone please explain to me what you mean when you say marriage is hard." And then there's this other video in response, and the woman reads part of her husband's vows, and he says, marriage is work and it's going to be hard and XYZ. And I hope this doesn't sound unromantic, but I'm not talking about the kind of work that's like late nights and an early morning commute and stale coffee. I'm talking about the work that an artist does on something that they care about, and it's vital and it's important and it's prioritized and it's meaningful. And that's the kind of work that this is going to be. And I thought that was so well said. And the work doesn't have to be drudgery, as he put it in his vows. It can be beautiful. And so from there, let's transition to the lessons you've learned from under the bar and how those applied and even saved your life.
Yeah. One of the things that the barbell taught me, because I started lifting or when I was about 16 to start to be a little bit better for football. And then kind of kept with it after that. And one of the biggest lessons is that you can do hard things, which I feel like you should have a trademark on at this point. But uh, the bar is just there, and 300 pounds is always 300 pounds. And it doesn't care if you had a crappy day, doesn't care if you had a terrible night of sleep, doesn't care if you feel like being there or not. It's just there. And it's if you want to personify the barbell a little bit, it's almost like a silent challenge. Like, come on. And you get to choose whether you're going to respond to it or not. And there are times when you get under a bar for a squat, or you unrack it for a bench, or you try to pull it up off the ground for a deadlift, and you're like, I don't know if this sucker's going to move. Like, I don't know if I can stand back up. So there's the obvious physical evolution that comes with it as you get stronger, you build muscle, you see how your body's changing over time, and hopefully you like those changes, because I know I certainly have. But then there's the mental changes that go alongside it, and are necessary to keep seeing physical changes, where you have to be willing to take a shot. You got to be willing to take some risks, go for a lift that you're not 100% sure you're going to do. And then you're going to fail some of them. So it teaches you necessarily how to deal with failure. It teaches you to get back up. What can you learn when you take another shot? And then if you don't, then that's just the end of it. But if you choose to step back in and step back up, then you can keep going. And eventually you get strong enough to actually succeed. So for me, it taught me that I can be someone who does hard things and can win and can handle failure. Doesn't mean that I'm a failure, it just gives me more lessons, more ammunition. And yeah, physically it put the muscle on my frame that I needed to get through the ICU. Um, one thing that I'd known about in the research, but again, never planned on actually testing out myself, was that if you get to a certain level of fitness, and then you take a break for a long period of time, you're not in the gym, you're not lifting a barbell, or you're not running your usual mileages or whatever, it's easier to get back to that level of fitness afterwards than it was to get there in the first place. So I lived that out because I had to start from, say, ground zero. I mean, like working up the strength to push myself up in bed so I could sit at the side of the bed. And I needed assistance to stand up. And even that wasn't for very long at first. And working on walking with a walker and assistance, and getting back the strength, even just to go up on my toes for a fraction of a second, and all this. And then that turned into good old yellow TheraBand exercises and like light weights, which was a big head trip again, as someone who I've never been the strongest power lifter, but deadlifting almost 500 pounds and squatting 415, that sort of thing. And I was getting my butt kicked by sit to stands at the side of my bed. So I had to come to terms with that and keep doing the things, and then eventually get a bar back in my hands. Excuse me. And then get back in the gym. And it was a slow evolution of getting back into powerlifting training. But through that, the muscle started to come back onto my frame much quicker than I thought. My body remembered how to squat and deadlift and bench press faster than I thought, even though there was still the new element of like, there's this nerve pain and a whole bunch of weird swelling, and I still had open wounds that needed bandaging and some new things to figure out. But there was some of the familiarity, and that was cool to see.
I think that transitions well into a question that I always ask, but I'm going to alter. I would usually ask, what does the word endurance mean to you? And if you want to give that answer, you're more than welcome. However, I would love to hear, what does the word unbreakable mean to you?
I'll give an answer to both. Unbreakable, I chose that name originally as my company name because it signified being able to take your licks from life, from circumstances, from whatever, uh, to get injured and still be able to come back, to not be broken. Um, you hear the phrase, bend but don't break. You know, I think my stance on it has changed a little bit still, where sometimes we feel broken, and I certainly felt broken coming back or going through the hospital. Pardon me. But I still think that you can take pieces of what was once broken and build something even stronger, where it'll move. You think of skyscrapers, and they're made to move with the wind a little bit, because if they're too rigid, then they're in danger of actually falling or collapsing. Um, that has significance for me because training, strength training, becoming stronger, has never just been about the numbers in my life or for the clients that I work with. It's about how that changes you, how that makes you better able to show up for yourself, for your family, for your clients, all the people that you care about, and be able to shoulder more burdens, take more punches, and still keep coming. Um, to paraphrase Rocky, I guess. So, how it's changed for me now, or what it really signifies, yeah, is that I wouldn't just say bend but don't break. I would also say if you do feel broken, take those pieces and try to figure out how to put them together and maybe what new pieces to add so that what you're left with is something even stronger. So there's that answer. Um, Endurance. I was thinking about earlier today, and for me, it comes down to being willing to do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel, for as long as needs to be done. And that'll apply whether you're, training for a marathon or an ultra or prepping for a powerlifting meet, which I'm now doing. My first one back is going to be May 25th, which I'm stoked for. Um, or doing the work of your relationships. And, you know, it's not fun. It's tiresome. It's also important and it takes time, like we've said. So for me, endurance is the willingness to do that work for as long as needs to be done, regardless of whether you feel like doing it that day.
So beautifully said. So simple in concept, so hard to do sometimes. Um, what keeps you going? What keeps you enduring? What keeps you picking up the pieces every time you feel broken and building again?
It's a combination of faith and family. Um, Faith, I do believe that I have a purpose here, and I think I guess it's evolving as far as what that might be, as a direct result of both my eye condition and this fight back from HLH. It's changed what I thought was going to be the case for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Uh, but there's the element of trusting the Lord that He'll take me where I need to go and give me, the words and the strength to do it. And then the other core thing is my family, my wife, my daughters. Um, every day before, as I sit down at the computer before I start the work, it's Lord, intentions today are to love, serve, and honor you, and to provide for my family, so that we're just okay and have what we need. So whether that's showing up for myself in the form of my barbell training or my cardio or getting enough sleep, because I understand now how doing that for me is serving my family. And when I opt or when I forget that, or when I choose to think, oh, you know what, it's fine because I'm doing this other thing, which feels more immediately important for my family at the cost of taking care of, I don't know, replenishing my tank so I can keep going over the long term, it always inevitably comes back to the reminder of, hey, these things matter. Your family needs you to do it.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's what it is for me.
Yeah, sometimes we need to be selectively selfish so that we can be sustainably selfless. And there's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And with all of that being said, we'll move to the final question of the podcast. And, I ask this every time. There are a lot of undercurrents that are similar to everyone's answer, and yet also differences that I think strike people in different ways. And so I hope and I know what you say will resonate with someone out there in a unique way. But if someone's going through a tough time, a dark season, they're just feeling lost, unsure of what to do or where to go next, what would you say to them?
I would say if you're anything like me, it can feel scary or feel like weakness to tell someone what you're going through or even ask for help. I believe now that asking for help and being vulnerable like that is one of the bravest and most courageous things that you can do. So I'd encourage you, listener, to reach out if you have someone in your life, um, I'll speak for myself. I'd imagine, Joe, you feel the same. Like, shoot us a message. We're around as well. But don't feel like you have to do it alone. And the hard times, we go through them for different reasons. The circumstances might be awful and horrific and not what you expected. And if you can try to find some sort of meaning, some sort of sustaining hope, belief, purpose, whether it's for someone else, whether it's to set an example, prove a point, um, or just live faithfully. Finding your why and finding meaning is probably a really important thing to do. And then just remember that you don't have to be perfect. Um, I tell my daughters, look, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to try your best. And I think that also, again, leads back to the first point of you don't have to do it by yourself.
I love a good, comprehensive, circular answer there. It all connects, it all makes sense. And Jared, I mean, if people are listening to this and they want to see what you looked like when you were going through all of this, if they want to connect with you, learn more about you, where's the best place for people to do that?
Yeah. Instagram is where I'm most active, jared.rebuild_stronger. You can also find me on TikTok. I haven't changed the handle there yet, but it's unbreakable_strength. Yeah, I'm an open book. Come, you can see how the story's unfolded so far. You can follow along because it's still going. And if there are any questions that you have, whether it's about my story or anything that you're thinking about going through, shoot me a message. I would love to chat.
Awesome. Well, Jared, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your story, the way you show up in this world, the way you fight against the hard things in life and for the things that matter most. And so thank you for this. And I'm excited to watch your story continue to grow from here.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate those words. Thank you for the invite. I got to say, man, as much as you might appreciate what I'm doing, it's mutual. And I really love this platform and what you're doing with these podcast episodes. The questions that you ask, we talked about being attentive and being present. You're a walking example of it. So that's awesome, dude.
Thank you so much, man. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.